Good evening, everyone. I'm going to give you just a moment to settle. Also, everybody's looking particularly gorgeous this evening, so you should do a little, looking around. I have a particularly handsome view in front of me, and I'm enjoying it myself. My name is Robert Reedfar. I'm the editor of Transition Magazine and a professor of Studies of Women, Gender, and Sexuality, and of African and African American Studies here at Harvard. I am thrilled and deeply humbled by the extremely pleasant task of welcoming you to the inaugural Rajat Neogy Memorial Lecture. I'm even more excited, however, by the fact that the remarkable Maryse Condé, here to my left, will be the first person to deliver this lecture and to receive this grand honor. While I'm bragging, I should point out that just yesterday, Maryse's latest novel, The Gospel According to the New World, translated from the original French work, L'Évangile du Nouveau Monde. I'll do it again. L'Évangile du Nouveau Monde. There's more French coming, so don't get too worked up. Since you liked it, L'Évangile du Nouveau Monde, it's the liaison that's the problem. Translated from that work with precision and beauty by Richard Philcox. That work has been shortlisted for the International Booker Prize. So, grand congratulations to both Maryse and to Richard. I will say that if they don't win the prize, there's going to be trouble in Cambridge, okay? The Rajat Neogy Memorial Lecture honors the legacy of the Ugandan-born writer and poet Rajat Neogy, who founded Transition in 1961. The magazine went on to become a singularly important platform for artists and writers of Africa and the African diaspora. Rajat Neogy remained at the magazine's head until 1968, when the Ugandan government jailed him for sedition after the magazine criticized proposed constitutional reforms. After his release, Neogy relocated to Ghana, handing the editorship of the magazine over to the Nigerian writer Wole Soyinka in 1973. It is a particular honor to be able to welcome Wole Soyinka to this evening's gathering. And to offer him all of our gratitude for his grand role in the stewardship and growth of Transition Magazine, not to mention the always remarkable and sometimes dastardly things that he does in and to the English language. Mr. Soyinka, would you rise for a moment and allow us to properly greet you? Or no? No. The answer is no. The answer is no. Consider yourself properly greeted. I would also like to take a moment to welcome, I think there are 3 members of the Neogy family here with us. Am I right about that? Even more excited. I'm going to do the try to get you to stand too thing, so I'm going to soften you up. So I believe that we're welcoming Aisha Neogy. I believe that we're welcoming Rajat Neogy's daughter. Also, I believe that we're welcoming Khalil. Khalil? There you go. And also Nico Colorado Mansfield. Correct on the name? Thank you for being here. And I just want to say to you personally, it is an honor that you're here, and your relative's legacy, your grandfather's legacy, is held in great honor here. In 1991, Transition Magazine moved to the United States and is now published under the auspices of the Hutchins Center for African and African American Research at Harvard University. Thanks so much to the center's director, Henry Louis Gates, Jr., its executive director, Abby Wolf, who we really should applaud. Abby makes all things Harvard run. And the events coordinator, Matt Weinberg, who I'm pointing out right now and who's hating me for doing so. Thank you so much, Matt. Also, I'd like to personally thank the staff of the Studies of Women, Gender, and Sexuality and African and African American Studies who helped a lot. There are 3 transition board members here, They are Régine Jean-Charles, Joan Animadou, and Mabula Sumahoro, who you will hear a little bit about later. And much of the reason that transition is functioning after I became the editor 2 years ago is that we have a terrific managing editor who has stopped the building from being burned down and who has done many things to make up for many of the messes that I've made. Tanya, your light shines so much more brightly than I think you know. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for all the work that you've done for our journal and for this event. You have been amazing, and you're an amazing gift to this institution. Thank you so much. Maryse Condé has prepared her comments in advance. These will be read to us tonight by Mabula Sumahoro, who is Associate Professor in the English Department at the University of Tours. She is also the 2022-2023 Mellon Arts Project International Visiting Professor of African American and African Diaspora at Columbia University and visiting faculty at Bennington College. Dr. Sumahoro is the author of Le Triangle et l'Hexagone, Réflexions sur une identité noire, which was translated into English by Dr. Kaima Glover, who I also think is just right here, as Black is the Journey, Africana the Name, and published by Polity Press in 2021. You should be buying it on your phones right now. In 2023-2024, she will be a fellow at the Institute for Ideas and Imagination at Columbia University's Global Center in Paris, where she is working on a script series adapting Maryse Condé's magnum opus, Ségou. Oh my goodness. I want to come to all of the events. Finally, Maryse Condé will be formally introduced tonight by Professor Jesse McCarthy. Professor McCarthy, a specialist in mid-20th century African-American literature, is an assistant professor of English and African-American studies here at Harvard and the author of 2 wonderful works, so much so that I'm jealous of him. The essay collection, Who Will Pay Reparations on My Soul, as well as his 2021 debut novel, Fugitivities, which the New York Times describes as virtuosic and glorious. I will say personally that I met Jesse on the first day of faculty orientation here at Harvard 5 years ago. He was staring at me in that way that out-of-place African-American people stare at seemingly even more out-of-place African-American people. He then asked me if I was Robert Reed for speaking to me as if I were Lizzo or Beyonce. He was not the type of Harvard professor I was expecting. And I quickly learned that Jesse's bracing intellect is met only by his remarkable kindness and his staunch commitment to our many communities. Thank you, Jesse, for being here this evening. And then finally, I will end by saying that though we will not have a question and answer this evening or a reception, that all of you are invited to join us tomorrow from noon until 1:30 for a reception in honor of Ms. Condé and Mr. Philcox. That will take place at the Hutchins Center located at 104 Auburn Street, just off Harvard Square. I'll repeat it. That's at the Hutchins Center, 104 Auburn Street. Mount Auburn Street. Sorry. I'll repeat it again. It'll be at 104 Mount Auburn Street, just off of Harvard Square at noon. Everyone is very much invited. And you'll need to take the elevator up. I thank you so much for your presence. I thank you so much for journeying here to be with us. And I present to you Professor McCarthy.
Thank you, Robert. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
It is a great honor and a distinct privilege to be given the opportunity to introduce to you this evening one of the great writers of our time, Maryse Condé. A writer who, over a career spanning the last half of a century, has been at the center of a great historical transformation of literary space. A revolution that accompanied the conflicts of decolonization that were ignited at the end of the Second World War, and in a variety of ways some more or less evident, continue into the present day. Those of us who study and situate ourselves within diasporic intellectual practice have always known how central the Caribbean has been to the literary expression of the Black world. The Antilles, Haiti, Cuba, St. Lucia, Jamaica, Barbados, the Bahamas, Martinique, and of course, Guadeloupe. These fertile islands have given us some of our greatest poets, like Aimé Césaire, some of our greatest revolutionary thinkers, like Frantz Fanon and Sylvia Wynter, and indeed some of our greatest novelists, like our invited guest today, Maryse Condé. I say novelist because the novel is the form most readers know her for. But Maryse Condé is a writer who has gifted us a broad and dazzling oeuvre, spanning, by my count, no less than 17 novels, half a dozen plays, children's literature, and a rich and important body of criticism and essays, a body of criticism which I would add I feel is too often overlooked, and includes Notes sur un retour au pays natal, her reading of Césaire's great poem, Notebook of a Return to the Native Land. La civilisation du Bossal, réflexion sur la littérature orale de la Guadeloupe et de la Martinique, still one of the most important studies we have of the oral literature and storytelling traditions of the French Antilles. And La Parole des Femmes, essai sur des romancières des Antilles de langue française, a path-breaking essay on women's voices in Caribbean writing. As professor of French and Romance philology at Columbia University, Condé contributed immensely to the study of Caribbean literature in the United States and its diffusion in the broader Anglophone Academy. And through the Center for Francophone Studies at Columbia, which she founded, Condé has created a significant legacy in terms of creating the sustained conditions for that study to continue and grow. But it is Condé's novels that have, of course, most passionately drawn generations of readers, again and again, into the great diasporic reservoirs of memory, imagination, history, and consciousness that she uniquely fashions and blends. In Ségou, she wove together a generational saga set in the 18th century, using the tales and historical events that shaped the lives of the Bambara peoples as they were buffeted by the arrival of Islam and by the European slave trade. It is one of the great modern novels, alongside Achebe's and others, about the crucible that produced the painful phase of Africa's colonial domination. In I, Tituba, Black Witch of Salem, she brought to life the woman we know only as Tituba, the Black or indigenous woman who was accused in the Salem witch trials before disappearing from the historical record. Condé's novel gives her heroine a revolutionary twist that is even more haunting and powerfully symbolic. In Victoire, My Mother's Mother, she drew on memory and autobiography to uncover the sources of hidden pain and intimate lineage that pass between mothers and daughters in their fraught but also tender attempts to know and understand each other's lives. I've named only some of my favorite of her works, but there is a vast archipelago of stories that I encourage you, especially the students who are here this evening, to venture out and explore. You will find that Condé's novels are infused with a wholly original spirit and wit. They are made with the richness of the French language and the beauty of the Guadeloupean Creole. But they also transcend both. They are always distinctively written in the mythic and poetic voice that is hers alone. And for those of us who only have English, they are also marvelously and faithfully translated by her husband, Richard Philcox. And we can give you a quick round also. over many years. Her latest novel, The Gospel According to the New World, is, according to the author's statement here, the last novel she intends to gift us with. Taking on the gospel and writing directly and passionately about love seems fittingly ambitious for the scope and vitality of her restless imagination over such a distinguished career. I am pleased to say, although we've already just heard it, that we learned just yesterday that it has been shortlisted for this year's International Booker Prize. But whatever the outcome of the jury is, we know the magnitude of the importance of Maryse Condé to our literature will never be measured in prizes, however richly deserved. The writing remains of permanent interest because it holds observations and gives us language and voice for the relations that bind the diaspora together and to the greater forces of history and of human passion, tragic and comic as it so often is. I want to end with a quick contemporary observation. Maryse Condé published her first novel, Here Makonon, in 1976. The protagonist heroine of that novel is a young, alienated woman, highly intelligent, by the name of Veronica, who travels from Paris to West Africa to Kwame Nkrumah's Ghana. But she has a recurring memory of a handsome young African street sweeper who cleaned the gutters along the Rue de l'Université where she was studying. She sees him, and he means something to her that the novel understands to be meaningful not only to her character, but to the future of that entire society. As we gather here today, the street sweepers, the éboueurs of Paris, are on strike. Now, as then, many of them are African immigrants or of African descent. Their struggle and the embrace of that struggle is a sign of hope. Maryse Condé's novels have encoded in myth, in retellings and retracings and reimaginings the hope and struggles of our new world still struggling to take form. Without further delay, I am so deeply honored to turn the podium over. Maryse, merci infiniment du fond du cœur pour votre longue vie, vos livres, votre parole et votre vision qui nous anime. Thank you and welcome. We are honored by your presence.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Bonsoir, Maryse. Bonsoir. Ça va? Ok. Un peu. Bonsoir, Richard. Okay. So I want to thank Robert Reed Farr, Antonia Larkin, and the entire editorial board for entrusting me with this mission. Tonight, I am to read Maryse's words as translated by Richard, right? So what a mission. Thank you to all the people in attendance, the colleagues, dear friends, esteemed colleagues, and I'll just jump into it. The title of this lecture by Maryse Condé is Sisterhood. I was particularly keen to come to Harvard for a very personal reason. I wanted to thank those American universities who had invited me to teach on their campuses, whereas I had written only 3 novels. In other words, I was a perfect unknown. They were the ones who allowed me to exert my creativity as an author. I would like to list them all. Occidental College, UC Santa Barbara, UC Berkeley, University of Virginia, University of Maryland, Cornell University, Harvard University, and Columbia University, where I created the Center for French and Francophone Studies. Yes, as I said, they were instrumental in allowing me to become a writer. Consequently, I would like to thank them for allowing me to be who I am today. Throughout the world, women are portrayed in multiple, contrasting ways, and often, unfortunately, in a negative fashion. Some consider women to be merely a female destined to bear the male's offspring and procure him pleasure. Others claim that women are equal to men and, like them, can excel in any profession. Yet others blame them for being an object of lust and sexual desire, capable of destroying the world. In certain societies, especially Roman Catholic, women used to be compared to witches. We can recall here the great witch hunts which occurred in France. Women are represented riding a broomstick, a phallic symbol, since a witch is assumed to make love to Satan. I would like to point out that no traditional African religion has depicted women as such, and in Africa, witchcraft is a profession like any other, practiced by individuals of either sex. There are those who operate with their right hand, the healers of headaches and stomach upsets, and those who operate with their left hand, involved in more complex problems such as love and mending the ways of cheating husbands. African sorcerers receive their clients in dramatic settings such as caverns and grottos, leaving the imagination to think they are in special commerce with the invisible. When I started to suffer from arthritis and other illnesses while in Africa, I consulted a sorceress who lived in Uzu in Guinea. She was a gigantic woman with huge hands. She would massage my entire body while chanting incantations. When I took my leave, she handed me a packet of blue tablets which were supposed to make me well again. Needless to say, the treatment had absolutely no effect. It goes without saying that we in the West, unlike Afghanistan and Iran, are now in an age when prejudice has somewhat subsided. Women are free to work wherever they like. They can sing and dance and write articles for the press. But major flaws still exist. Equal pay for equal work is still a long way off. Prostitution is a common scourge and involves women from underprivileged milieu. Domestic violence is on the increase to the extent that the French have invented a word for it: feminicide. I have chosen 4 books in order to illustrate this slow and often painful ascension. The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. I, Tituba, Black Witch of Salem by yours truly. Hers truly. The Little Liar by Pascal Robert Diard, and Far from the Sea and Bitterness by Jocelyne Berroir. My choice of Margaret Atwood goes without saying. She wrote what has been called an international bestseller. Some people say she wrote the 20th century's best book about women. By calling the French edition The Scarlet Woman, the publishers, Robert Laffont, were no doubt making a veiled reference to Nathaniel Hawthorne, who published The Scarlet Letter in 1850. But the two books have nothing in common. Hester Prynne certainly sinned. She had a sexual relationship with the minister in charge of her soul. Nevertheless, at the end of her life, she earned admiration from her community in Salem through her discretion and courage, and devoted her time to good deeds and empathy. There can be no comparison with Margaret Atwood's heroine. At the end of the novel, she escapes thanks to her commander's chauffeur, but we have no idea where she goes, and the ending can in no way be considered a victory. The state of Gilead is created following a widespread war where women are reduced to their basic functions of reproduction. They lose their name and are designated by the name of their master of Commandeur or Commander. They are housed together and divided into very strict categories. The Marthas, for example, cook and dispense lessons. We don't know what kind, but they probably involve the Bible. They wear a green uniform. The handmaids are rigged out in a scarlet uniform down to their ankles. They wear heavy laced boots of the same color with a white bonnet floating around their head. They go shopping in twos so as to avoid sexual aggression. Sometimes they see men who have committed serious crimes hanging from trees. They seldom speak, and only in coded sentences. An accompanying guide tells a group of Japanese tourists who want to photograph them and ask questions that they are perfectly happy. Their main function is to make love to their commanders in the hope of giving birth. Love is a high-flown word where only the concept of procreation is essential. If after several years they prove to be sterile, they are dispatched to the colonies. Margaret Atwood doesn't say which. During one of these clinical visits by a so-called physician, although such a profession is forbidden, the heroine of The Handmaid's Tale is told of a way to make her pregnant. Terrified, she refuses, an act which will eventually liberate her. As for the men, they constitute a superior species. The commanders control everything in a society where love and desire seem to have disappeared. When the heroine's commander invites her to meet him outside the official hours, he asks her to play Scrabble with him and live through old magazines from pre-Gilead times. The most serious punishments are for the crimes of rape and sexual abuse, since the men must learn to curb their dangerous sexual urges. Consequently, the favorite ceremonies are birth and name-giving, days when commanders, handmaids, and martyrs are temporarily forgotten and everyone sprouts words of peace and love. Margaret Atwood doesn't believe at all in these apparent scenes of joy. For her, these ceremonies consist of imposing a set of clothes on a newborn baby. The Handmaid's Tale is a complex novel. It can be considered an ode to love, such as we perceive it today, with all its imperfections, risks, and freedom to be oneself. Throughout the novel, its heroine thinks constantly of Luke, the man who once shared a life and the father of a child. Their hearts once beat in unison while the same desire flooded their bodies. That's how things were before Gilead. The Handmaid's Tale is also a work of science fiction. A few days ago, I watched the movie Don't Worry, Darling by Olivia Wilde, which addresses the same subject of female oppression. It is finally a warning. Margaret Atwood has pinpointed the weak points in the status of women in our country and the West in general, and warned of things to come. She says the book is an imagined account of what happens when not uncommon pronouncements about women are taken to their logical conclusions. But dare we say that this literary monument limits itself solely to women in the Western world? How to eradicate the power of money? How to escape poverty? The Handmaid's Tale remains silent on these issues. It merely classifies destitute women in a caste called econo-wives. I, Tituba, Black Witch of Salem, I have often told the story when, after the publication of Ségou, Simone Gallimard, head of the publishing house Mercure de France, asked me to write a book for a collection, Histoires immédiates. I was flattered. I had only published 4 novels, Ere Maconon, A Season in Riada, and the 2 volumes of Ségou. And here was a prestigious publisher asking me to work with her. There was no way I could refuse. But who could I write about? The first name that came to mind was Celia Cruz, the Cuban singer, whose raucous voice I adored. But I learned she left Cuba after criticizing Fidel Castro, who at the time was one of my gods. So there was no way I was going to pay tribute to her. What about Suzanne Césaire? I liked her articles in the journal Tropique, which she edited together with her husband. But wasn't she too intellectual? Who would understand her words inspired by the Brazilian scholar Osvaldo de Andrade? Martinican poetry will be cannibal or not. I also thought of Nanny of the Maroons, but a historian friend told me she had never existed, although you could visit her grave in Jamaica. It was then a true miracle occurred. I was living in Los Angeles at the time and teaching on a Fulbright at Occidental College. While I was perusing the shelves of the library of UCLA, a book literally fell into my hands. It was the novel for young adults by Anne Petrie called Tituba of Salem Village. I checked it out and read it in one go. After that, my mind was made up. I would write about Tituba. But I knew virtually nothing about the Salem witch trials. It was a colleague of Occidental College, Rose Cohn, who gave me further information and told me that at the time, Jews as well as blacks were targets of contempt and exclusion, something I didn't know. I made several trips to Salem to add to my documentation. Finally, when I felt ready, I began writing. As an epigraph, I declared in fun that Tituba and I lived on the closest of terms for a year. It was my way of saying that I had worked hard on the subject before writing the novel. I placed the book under the sign of a rape. The opening sentence goes like this. Abina, my mother, was raped by an English sailor on the deck of Christ the King one day in the year of 1600 while the ship was sailing for Barbados. It was not only a way of signifying that the church had never been opposed to slavery, but also a way of assimilating slavery in its entirety to an abduction. Slavery and crime were one and the same. The enslaved lost everything, their gods, their language, their customs, and their goods. At the same time, I wanted to provoke and even shock sometimes. That's why I never wanted Tituba to be old and unattractive, as Arthur Miller imagined her in The Crucible. I wanted her to be beautiful, alluring, and collecting lovers one after the other. John Indian, her Jewish master, Benjamin Cohn d'Azevedo, Christophe, and later on, her young lover, Iphigenie. When I learned that Angela Davis loved this book and taught it in her classes, I had no qualms asking her to write a preface for the English translation, which the University of Virginia was preparing to publish. She accepted, and her foreword contributed enormously to the success of the book in English-speaking countries. But I must confess, it lost much of Tituba's provocative characteristics. On several occasions, Tituba lamented she looked for her story in the Salem witch trials but could not find it. Was it because her color was a subject of contempt and she did not deserve to be mentioned? When John Indian asks her to bear him a child, she refuses, something that would please Mona Chollet, author of In Defense of Witches, The Legacy of the Witch Hunts, and Why Women Are Still on Trial. In her book, Mona Chollet claims that motherhood is not a vocation, but governed by social conventions. I invented the character of her Jewish lover, Benjamin Cohn d'Azevedo, because I wanted to introduce two disadvantaged human groups, the former despite his wealth. Benjamin lost his 9 children and his wife in a fire which merely accentuated his melancholic nature. Moreover, he is skinny and pasty-looking. Tituba calls him my crooked lover. It's he who pays her passage back to Barbados, for he considers he is being punished for keeping Tituba in his service in Barbados. In Barbados, Tituba finds Abina, her mother, again, as well as Mama Yaya, who is a healer and teaches her the secret of plants. As a result, Tituba becomes a well-known figure across the island. What makes the book so powerful is nature's inspiration. My parents owned a change of air house in Sarcelles, Guadeloupe, not far from the beach at Viard. Every morning, my father used to go for a swim. I can still see his spindly legs as stiff as a guava branch. My mother did not accompany him and preferred to stay home and cultivate her garden. She was the one who planted the 2 ylang-ylang trees at the entrance to our house. Thanks to her, I grew to love plants and trees and conveyed my love of them to my heroines: breadfruit, avocados, mangoes, mahogany, flame trees, and jacarandas. At one point in her life, Tituba decides to join the Maroons, those slaves who rebelled, took refuge in the mountains, and at night attacked their former masters. It's an act that Angela Davis would have surely appreciated, combining personal struggles with the collective fight. The fact that such a revolt unfortunately failed and the Maroons were massacred led me to think of the UPLG movement for the liberation of Guadeloupe, of which I had been a member some years previously, and which had failed to improve the lives of our community. After her death, Tituba remains a major figure. She chooses Samantha as her heir and promises to teach her all the hidden powers of herbs. Some years earlier, she refused to bear a child for John Indian because motherhood is for women who are free and not for the enslaved. The child of her womb had to be guaranteed a radiant future. Miles away from Barbados, the Salem witch trials carried on for years. All the women were either condemned to prison or death. Only Tituba escaped. Our beloved Tituba was bewitched. Oddly enough, when I was writing Tituba, I didn't get the feeling it was fabricated or, as Aragon said, true lies or the lying truth. I got the impression I was reliving a true story. Witness the scene where John Indian advises Tituba to tell the master what he wants to hear. Tituba protests, even enslaved, we must remain faithful to our true feelings. Tituba is very close to my heart, close to my rebellious ways and capable of saying what I think. And that's perhaps why readers love her. The Little Liar by Pascal Robert Diard. Accusations of rape and sexual abuse are becoming increasingly numerous these days. It's as if our patriarchal society, supposedly constituted to protect our children, has decided to destroy them. There was the case of Jeffrey Epstein. Accused of sexually abusing underage girls for years, he committed suicide in jail. Implicated for his role in the case, Prince Andrew was forced to give up his royal privileges by Queen Elizabeth. In France, television personalities such as Patrick Poivre d'Arvor and the former Minister for Ecology, Nicolas Hulot, were likewise accused in similar cases. Endowed with the gift of provocation during all this time, I had only one thought in mind. Suppose the victims had lied. It would have the effect of a bomb. Consequently, when I heard about Pascal Robert Diard's book, The Little Liar, I rushed to read it and discovered it was the drama I had always imagined. Back home in Guadeloupe, we liked to laugh, and we would have called the book Big Bossomed Lisa. But we didn't have the heart to laugh, rather to cry. Here are the facts as described in the book. One day, Alice Kéridreux, a 40-year-old lawyer, somewhat tired of her work, saw a pretty young girl of neat appearance enter her office. Her name was Lisa Charvet. After having introduced herself, she confessed, "I was the one who accused Marco Lange of rape a few years ago, but I lied." Dumbfounded, the lawyer looked straight at her. Marco Lange had been rotting in prison for 3 years. When Lisa ended her confession, the lawyer suggested, "If you like, what you have just said will remain in this office." In other words, she was suggesting she remain silent instead of telling the truth. It was a terrible thing to say. But a few days later, Lisa Charvet returned with 3 typewritten sheets which ended with the words, "I ask Marco Lange to forgive me." In other words, she maintained her deposition. Alice Kéridreux was obliged to accept. Lisa then launched into a distressing account with a mournful voice. She recounted, when she was around 14, that on returning from vacation, her breasts had grown bigger, much too big. They looked like 2 bombs. They aroused the boys at college who asked her for a handjob or a blowjob. She accepted because she was having trouble at home. She discovered her father was cheating on her mother. Her sister, Solène, didn't like her and spared no pains poking fun at her. Life was lackluster. Hence her nickname, Little Slut. She imagined her friends were turning their backs on her because of her reputation. She went and confided in her best friend that she had been raped, which explained the reason for her behavior. She had no idea that her best friend would rush to tell her mother. Her parents then notified the police of their underage daughter's rape. The lawyer who pleaded her case argued Lisa had been a victim. Nobody at school had bothered to take note of her moods and her distress except for 2 teachers. No, it wasn't Marco Lange who was the victim, but rather Lisa, who was the true victim of her school and the boys. After that, everything went so fast, she said. What did that mean? Lisa meant that certain acts are not judged if we mean to judge is to weigh the for and against. Rape and sexual abuse come under this category of not delivering judgment, from the examining magistrate to the jury's deliberation and the final verdict. She witnessed all that, totally helpless. That's what she meant by everything went so fast. Pascal Robert Diar's excellent book is well written, but it's not only the style that counts, it's also her intelligence. Society has made the rape victims of the rich and famous untouchable. During these difficult times, people rallied round Lisa and made her into a celebrity. The lawyer managed to get Marco Lange sentenced to 10 years imprisonment. But gradually, Lisa was racked with remorse and could no longer bear it. The Little Liar is also a message on the subject of school life. Lisa found only 2 teachers who were concerned by her change of behavior. One of them informed the principal, who merely shrugged his shoulders. He had better things to do than worry about Lisa Charvet's grades. One doesn't dare imagine what he would have said if he had been one of the likes of Marine Le Pen, if Lisa had been an Arab or an African from one of those countries decimated by colonialism and neo-colonialism, endeavoring with difficulty to find its footing. Pascal Robert Diar does not tell us how the second trial ended, so we can only guess. I also appreciated the book because she portrays a character who forgets how rapists and sexual predators are hateful individuals. You may well wonder what made Lisa Charvet so forgetful. Quite simply, life itself. To conclude, Pascal Robert Diar's book is a lesson of tolerance and intelligence in our troubled times. It's the style which hooks the author to the reader and keeps her from losing interest. All through The Little Liar, you can hear the yécri, yécra of the storyteller. Far from the Sea and Bitterness by Jocelyne Berroir. Jocelyne Berroir is mainly known in Guadeloupe, Martinique, and Africa, places where famous female singers are few and far between. She has a voice of her own, whereas her island of Martinique has lost her voice, only to be heard again thanks to the hurricanes. It's no small paradox that tourists to our islands return home, their heads filled with marvelous images and souvenirs, whereas our children are forced into exile to look for work, turn their backs on the sea and all of nature's marvels. I admire Jocelyne Berroir because she had a hit song, Collet Serré, with a white Creole, Philippe Laville, whose name is Philippe Durand de la Villégigue du Fresnay. Whereas the white Creoles, the descendants of slave owners, are lost in the French Caribbean. It was a gesture of tolerance and forgiveness. Let us now take a look at the somewhat obscure title of the book, Far from the Sea and Bitterness. Jocelyne Berroir means she wants to forget the unscrupulous managers, late payments or no payments at all for concerts often performed far from the sea of her native island. Her biography is sweet, sweet, told with benevolence, remembering only the good things in her life. She decided to give up her studies in pharmacy and join a group of musicians called Cassav. This name of Cassav pays homage to a local tradition which is too often denigrated or outright denied. Cassava bread is a biscuit-like cake made from the root vegetable cassava or manioc and is mainly given to children or older people. It is baked in a pan in small bakeries located throughout our islands. Cassav does not compile traditional songs like the great Haitian singer Toto Bissant did in her time. They invented original modern melodies. Here, I would like to pause to remember Jacob Desvarieux, a great friend of Jocelyne Berroir's, who composed so many songs for Cassav in that very special voice of his. For those who are not familiar with Jocelyne Berroir, here's a quote from her song, Siwo. I want a man as sweet as syrup, an irresistible man. When he holds me tight, I'm looking for a man sweeter than syrup. What I'm asking for is not very complicated. He doesn't need to be handsome. He doesn't need to have wings. When life is bitter, what is missing is a little honey, something sweet in the morning, something sweet to make me feel good. Used to years of machismo, the Martinicans did not understand the humor at the time and were angry at those words. But the years passed and the song became one of Jocelyne Berroir's most popular hits. Music again. When Siwo was released, she was asked whether she was a feminist. I have no intention to be controversial. I don't think of myself as a militant. I just want to say what I think. I'm not particularly independent and take no pleasure being alone. But what I've always wanted to be, I've always wanted to be free with no shackles attached. That's what the song says. We can live with each other and not be taken for an idiot and still make our own choices. Why have I chosen these 4 women, whereas thousands of women write? What I can say is that my mother was always in my thoughts when I wrote. She who had never read any of my books and was never by my side during my struggles. What struggles did she have to confront as the daughter of an illiterate servant who did not speak a word of French? Whatever the case, she handed down to me her faith in freedom and respect for the downtrodden, for tolerance and open-mindedness. I wanted to talk about 4 different women, different yet united by the power and magic of literature. I wanted absolutely to include a singer, not a Maria Callas or Barbara Hendricks. That's why I chose Jocelyne Berroir from an island little known for its musical tradition. I wanted 2 academics, and only 2, since university discourse, in my opinion, is often formal and stuffy. I wanted a woman such as Puterbaugh, crushed by the horrors of slavery, and a handmaid terrified by a threatening future. I wanted a journalist, too, to talk about our contemporary society, Pascal Robert Diard. Now, how can we conclude? The struggle is not over. Let us continue the fight, as we say in Guadeloupe. In too many countries, religion is the cause of violence and death. In too many universities, the writing of dead white men, as the expression goes here in America, influences curricula and the subject of conferences. But we should be careful not to divide the world into 2 enemy groups. A man is not an enemy. He's a brother, a friend, and a partner. Together, we will build a world of tolerance and harmony. Moreover, the great majority of men endeavor to step down from the pedestal which society has built for them. Deep down, they are well aware of their weak points and flaws. I differ, however, on one point from the feminists, and that is the subject of motherhood. Contrary to Mona Chollet, author of In Defense of Witches, I believe that every woman is fulfilled by motherhood. When the newborn baby lays its little head on its mother's breast and begins to suck her milk, the mother is overcome with an indescribable happiness. Woman, man, and child, together with these 3 powerful resources, we will build the world of tomorrow. Maryse Condé.
Thank you so much, Mubula. Fantastically done and very beautiful and wonderful. Maryse, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for all the work that you have done and for honoring us with your presence. You make Harvard fantastic again. And it's been a long time since you've been here. We're mad about it, but you can come back and make it up. Thank you so much. These are for you. Oh, I can move? I'm just not good with the mic. All right, I'm going to give it to you.
Yes.
I want to give the flowers, first set of flowers to Maryse. I'll actually hand them to you. Would you, maybe? Thank you. I'll see you both. Thank you so much. D'Orient. Now, while I'm here, there are a whole bunch of... Now, while I'm here, sorry, there are a whole bunch of Neogys here. And so, as is our way at Harvard, we like to publicly embarrass people. So we'd love you to come up front really just quickly so that we can also give you some flowers. I know where you are, so you can't hide from me. Come on, you can do it. People want to take pictures and Google you and be nice. Thank you. Oh, thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for coming. Look at this. Wait a minute, where is your... No one else is going to come? There you go. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. With that, that ends this evening's part of the event. I will remind you that tomorrow at noon, we will meet at the Hutchins Center, which is on Mount Auburn Street at, which address? 104 Mount Auburn Street. Thank you so much. It is a wonderful pleasure.